Our subject tonight is the sons of God in light of Zion's glory. So I'm going to hang on to that title. Just tie everything into it. We have been looking at spirit beings that are involved in God's overall creation efforts. We talked a little bit about the angelic beings. I think we talked about the cherub. And I think a little bit about the seraphim, which I think we're going to talk about more because they're more in detail than the cherubs are. And then there's a whole host of angelic beings that we're going to deal with also and kind of look at some stories about the angels' accounts where they interact with man. But I wanted to address this issue as far as the sons of God because I think there is confusion among a lot of people on who is referenced as sons of God. In the Old Testament especially, I think a big assumption is that the reference to sons of God is that they are angelic beings, that they are not man. So that's 100%, not 100%, 180 degrees opposite of what I think. I think that they are man. And hopefully in tonight's lesson, I'll try to prove that to you and see what you think. These are obviously just my understandings of how the Bible presents things. And I think that when you look at the Bible, I think Brother Ward used to use the term piecemeal. Kind of like there's different sections, where you pick and choose what you want, and each section is different and unique. And then you move on to the next section. That's called dispensationalism, which is pretty popular in the Christian realm, so to speak. But if you look at the Bible from the aspect that there's a continuous plan for man from the very beginning, and all of the Bible is written to man about Christ, but about man's purpose on this earth. And if you understand that from the very beginning, even with the fall of Adam, there's a continuous process of growing towards a purpose, and that there are not different sections. I think it's Wednesday night, so my thoughts are a little bit scattered, which is why I wrote them down. And I think in my points here, I think we'll come across that. But I want to look at some of the points I wrote down. You probably don't have the outline with you, or maybe you looked at it. I have no idea. But I want to go through this. A lot of it's reminder, but I think it'll lay a foundation for looking at the sons of God as they are introduced to us in Genesis chapter 6 and then in Job chapter 1 and 2. Which is probably as far as we'll get tonight. I'm not even sure we'll get to Job, which I'm hoping we do, but we'll see how it goes. So first of all, the word son, which is the important word in the sons of God. The word God is Elohim. So it's not a generic term for God, but it's kind of a generic term. We looked at this. It doesn't necessarily speak of God alone. It's a word that's used as Lord. But this, in this case, is talking about God, the God. So these sons, what does it mean? What does the word son mean? Simply, there's a long definition of the Hebrew translation for the word son. But the basic word means a builder of a family name. And I thought that was interesting. A builder of a family name. And that's really the kind of the overall purpose. There is a family that's involved in God's purpose. And yet, who is that family? What is that family? And while it can be used of a child, just any child being born, kind of in a generic sense, context will indicate the usage in the passage. So there is never an indication, or there is no indication that it is ever referring to angels. Now, people will differ. If somebody holds the view that the sons of God that's mentioned, sons of God that are mentioned, that it is talking about angels, you'd have a hard time proving that, and I'll show you why. But there is no reference to angels being sons of God, with the one possible exception, and I'm still working in my mind what's the word? An around on that. I think there's a reason why it's used, but it's in Job chapter 38, verse 7. Let's go ahead and look at that right off the bat. This is the one problem verse that I have in this whole thing. So in Job, We will be looking at chapters 1 and 2, hopefully tonight. But in Job 38 and verse 7, simply says this. And in fact, I want to read starting in verse 1, just to get the context. God is speaking now to Job. He begins to answer Job. And the following chapters are some of the most amazing chapters in the scriptures as God speaks to Job. So in verse 31 of 38 it says, Then the Lord answered Job out of a whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? I love that. Who is this that's approaching me with no understanding? Job and his 3 so-called friends, or 4, gird up your loins now like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. I love that also. Gird up your loins like a man. I'm going to preach a message sometime called Gird Up Your Loins. I just like that title. I'll build a message around it. But we know what it means. Obviously they used to wear kind of skirt type of things. And when they were going to be doing labor or, exercise or a lot of walking, they would have to gird up their loins, or even going to war. They would have to tie up their skirts so they'd have more mobility and so on, and other reasons as well. But gird up your loins like a man, and I will demand of thee an answer. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, and if thou knowest, or who hath stretched out the line thereupon? This is all amazing. A visual of the creation, the vastness of it. Whereupon are the foundations thereof fattened? Or who laid the cornerstone, fastened rather, or who laid the cornerstones thereof? And this is the verse. When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. And then it goes on with some more points. Or who shut up the seas with the doors and break forth if thou had issued out of the womb. But that one verse there throws a monkey wrench in my theory that there are no verses that refer to sons of God as angels. So I think there's a consistency here. I don't want to talk about this tonight. I just wanted to point this out, that there is a phrase, the sons of God, that seem a little bit deeper than we're going here. So I just wanted to point that out. The stars also that are mentioned, the morning stars, seem to be angelic beings. However, it could be, I don't know who it was. Some musician, I think, and Brother Sam, maybe you heard of this, but they tried to, the stars actually produce music. There's noise out in the stars.
The Earth does, actually.
And planets.
Well, yeah, and the planets, they all, there's a noise that they make. And somebody tried to put it to a melody, and you can kind of do that. I'm not musically talented, but there's definitely noise going on out there. If that's anything like what it's talking about here, I don't know. I kind of doubt it. This may have more of a spiritual meaning with the morning stars be angelic beings. I believe even Jesus himself, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be, I think he's called the bright and morning star. So anyway, there's that. I want to get back to, yes?
I thought real quick, on verse 7 says, when the morning stars sang together, saying that they may be angels, and it says, and the sons of God shouted like another, like man.
Well,
Does
yes,
it sound
but
like that?
well, the problem is that this is talking about in the creation. And man wasn't there, so that's the problem. So yeah, there's problems with that, and I don't have answers just yet. I have things moving around in my brain, but they're not ready to come out of my mouth yet. So Sam,
Job 1:6.
which one?
Job 1:6.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Oh, the king before God.
Yeah. Remember, your lesson, you talked about that. That's what we
Yeah.
Oh, that's what you have at
Yeah,
the
the
bottom
king
of your
before God.
outline.
Yeah, that was the one.
Job 1:6.
You have that at the bottom of your outline.
Yeah, we're going to look at that.
That one also mentions
Mentions what?
that there are, those are talking about the angelic beings, right?
No,
No?
I don't think so. And we'll get to that.
Okay.
That's one of my points tonight. So, and that's why I want to kind of go back and restate some things to build the foundation and then move forward from there. Because I do think that the sons of God mentioned there are man. I think the sons of God mentioned in Genesis 6 are man. So let's go back to this. So my next point is this. Keep in mind that man is the highest order of God's creation. I do want to read another passage, which is why we might not get to Job tonight, but I do want to read this. In Hebrews chapter 2, Paul explains an Old Testament passage from a psalm. In Hebrews chapter 2, starting in verse 5, Paul, the writer of Hebrews says, "For unto the angels hath he not put in subjection the world to come, whereof we speak. But one in a certain place testifies, saying, What is man, that thou art mindful of him? Or the Son of Man, that thou visitest him?" So there's another phrase here that we might want to think about while we're talking about the sons of God. And that is the sons of man. Okay? So keep that in mind. Jesus is also referred to not only as the Son of God, but he's also called the Son of Man. So, verse 7, "Thou madest him, man, a little lower than the angels." And I pointed this out a few weeks back, that phrase is probably better understood for a little while inferior. In other words, for a time, man is now at a lower position than the angels. But that is not our purpose. So, "Thou crownedest him with glory and honor, and did set him over the works of thy hands." So God set man over the works of his hands. "Thou hast put all things in subjection under his feet, for in that he put all in subjection under him, he left nothing that is not put under him. But now we see that yet all things are put under him." I think there's a verse, I should have thought of this earlier, but it's in one of the Corinthian letters, I think, where Paul points out that, in fact, he asks the question, he says, "Do you not know that you will judge angels?" So man will be in a powerful position again one day when things are restored. Now in verse 9, "But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels." Again, same thing, better understood for a time lower than the angels, which is why we saw on Sunday that when he prayed to be delivered from death, God sent an angel to strengthen him. A little lower than the angels for the suffering of death. That was the purpose. "Crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, should taste death for every man. For it became him, for to whom are all things, and by whom are all things, in bringing many sons unto glory, to make the captain of their salvation perfect through sufferings." Many sons to glory. He's not talking about angels there. He's talking about mankind. Now, one thing about, well, I'm going to get to this in my points. So I'm going to just go point by point here. So the next point is Adam, or man, not necessarily Adam the man, but Adam meaning mankind, was created with a physical yet spiritual being at a time when there was perfect harmony between heaven and earth. So man is not an angel, he's not an animal, but he is a spirit being with a physical body, able to reproduce, created to reproduce. And there's no mention anywhere ever of any angels having any possibility of reproducing. That's not part of their makeup. Animals, yes, they are to reproduce. Plant life, yes, it reproduces. It has seed, and every seed produces life after its kind. Man, of course, the highest order of the seed-producing creation, produces seed after his kind. Okay? There is no mention ever of angels being able to reproduce. In fact, the question is asked of Jesus. I think it's I'm thinking Matthew 19, but I could be wrong. If a man is married and his brother dies, his brother marries his wife, and that happens 3 or 4 times, which was kind of tradition under the law. In the afterlife, whose wife is she? Okay, so whose marriage in this life, how's that going to be in the afterlife? And Jesus said, paraphrasing, that do you not know that you will be like angels in heaven? Like the angels. I think it's talking about without the capability of reproducing and so on, or even having an eternal relationship with one another. So angels don't have relationships with one another. I don't think there's even any mention of male or female angels. They're always mentioned in the male gender. Doesn't mean that they're male like us. Okay? It's speaking as far as just a way of speaking about their existence, just like God is always mentioned as male, even though God is neither male nor female. Yeah.
It seems that in the spiritual sense, there isn't a feminine. There's just one.
Right.
But in the physical sense, like with animals and then with man, you have a male and female. But you don't see that same sort of context when it comes to spiritual things.
Exactly.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And I have thoughts on that also, but I don't want to get off the point here. But yeah, I agree completely. So Adam, or man, has a single, continuous, unchanging purpose in God's plan for this earth. Everything seems to focus on this earth. Okay, it's not another planet. It is this earth that is the focus, at least as far as the Bible is concerned, which is all we know. Okay, it's all that there is. It focuses on man, on the earth, and then ultimately on Christ himself. So, next point, Adam, or man, fell in sin and unbelief, and died. I'm not sure what I mean by this next point. It doesn't make sense. Accomplished in the flesh where Adam, man, failed. Moving on. Genesis chapter 4 describes the lineage of Cain, who chose to follow his carnal nature rather than his spirit nature. So after the fall, man had two natures. Okay, he had a carnal fallen nature and a spirit nature. I believe Cain was a saved man. Okay, I don't even question that, to be honest. I think he chose rather to follow after his carnal nature. We see that example when he killed his brother. We know saved people can commit murder. So I see no problem with Cain being saved. However, he chose to follow his carnal nature rather than the spirit nature. And Genesis chapter 5 then describes the lineage of Seth, who chose to follow his spirit nature rather than the carnal nature. Now you have a dichotomy of man. You have a class of people who have, from Cain's descendants, who are spirit beings, and I think they were saved for the most part, but then as they got further and further away from God, following after the flesh, no doubt people became lost, dying, lost. Okay? I don't know who the first person was to die and go to hell, but somebody was. I think it took several generations after the fall, though, for that to happen. And it's mainly because of Cain's desire to follow after his flesh. And there's a picture here. I had in my outline a wonderful picture, but it just didn't seem right to put that. But there's a picture of life even now, of mankind, even us ourselves, choosing to follow after our carnal sinful nature or our spirit nature that desires to serve God. We know a lot of people who have no spirit nature, especially in today's world, that are in control of things. They're calling the shots. They're doing things that are purely fleshly, without any spirit guidance whatsoever. So there's the problem in the world today. So Genesis chapter 6 now, which we're going to go there, since I'm mentioning it now, Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6 describes the catastrophic result of the godly, Seth's descendants, intermingling with the ungodly. Okay, so now I know I said chapter 6, but since we're so close, I want to go back just for a moment and look at chapter 5. Because I think there's... chapter 6 is where those sons of God are mentioned. It's right before the flood, but there's no reason to, as you're reading this, there's no reason to insert something here that's not there. Angelic beings. Now, the idea is that these sons of God are angelic beings who took on flesh form and had relationships with women. And it produced what is referred to in chapter 6, verse, was it 5, I think?
Nephilim?
Yeah, the Nephilim. I don't think that's the case. Okay, I think there's a continuous thought here of man in a fallen state doing very wicked things. But notice how chapter 5 is worded. There's a genealogy here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I just want to get a little bit of taste. So verse 3 says, Adam lived 130 years, begot a son in his own likeness. Again, that son is what was our definition? The builder of a family name. So we have a family name here with Adam as the head of this family. So you probably heard this, and I believe it to be true, that there are 3 institutions on this earth that were ordained by God. One, and first and foremost, was the family. Okay? Man, Adam, was the head. He was the high priest of his family up until the point that he died. And then there was a succession of the next oldest male that would step up and take on that priestly role. He became the head of the family. And the family was basically responsible to him, and he was responsible to them. He was their priest. And then, of course, each father was the priest of his own household. This is called the patriarchal system. And it was in place up until, Exodus, actually, when everything changed. But notice the continuity here. Adam lived 100 years, begot a son in his own likeness, after his own image. He called his name Seth. Can somebody turn and read Luke chapter 3, verse 38 for me? Sword drill time. You get 100 points if you can quote it without looking. Luke chapter 3, verse 38.
The son of Enos, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God.
Oh, okay. So in this chapter, reading the lineage of Adam going forward, that whole chapter, or a portion of that chapter, is going backwards from Joseph to Adam. Read that again. We're not going to read the whole thing. It'd be too many names there, but.
The son of Enos, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God.
Son of Enos, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, who's,
The son of God.
Adam was the son of God. Huh. I thought Jesus was the son of God. He is. Adam failed. But I think there was a restoration that Adam kept the position as the son of God because of Christ, because of the covering of the skin, because of this covenant position. So all of these people that are mentioned in chapter 5 here, I think, and this is my opinion, are the sons of God. It is the patriarchal system, and it goes a long ways.
It's like the heir.
Exactly. And we get into chapter 5, we're introduced to Noah, who had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem, being the oldest, was this person. When Noah died, he became that person. And in fact, up until the time of Abraham, Abraham took offerings and so on to him. This is why I think, and I don't want to get off on this tonight, but a big reason why I think that Melchizedek mentioned is actually Shem. Melchizedek is just a title. It means, I think, Prince of Peace or something like that. But I think there's a connection there because Shem outlived Abraham by, I think, 35 or 50 years. So that this whole thing is in order here. So there's a reason why that's all stated. Now, it doesn't just shift gears in chapter 6. There's a continuous thought. Putting together chapter 4 and chapter 5, we come to chapter 6. It came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them. So this is about, 1,500 years or so? 1,600 years after Adam and Eve began to have kids. The earth is very populated by this point. There's a lot of people. Here's the problem. In verse 2. The sons of God. I think that's those ones mentioned in chapter 5. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, I think these are the daughters born to the ones from chapter 4. That they were fair, were beautiful, and they took them wives, all that they chose. This was very upsetting to God, and he said, my spirit shall not always strive with man. Man is under consideration here. For that he is also flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Okay? Then here's where it mentions the Nephilim. There were giants in the earth in those days. Now, somehow, people connect what takes place in the first two verses with these Nephilim. That the sons of God were angelic beings that produced these giants on the earth, physically giant people. But the word doesn't necessarily mean physically giant. It can have that meaning, but it also has several other meanings, like highly influential. One of the biggest meanings of that word is the word bully. Somebody who likes to gain power by putting others under their control. So this was going on, even back at that time. We're seeing the same thing take place today. What do you think that whole COVID issue and mask wearing thing was all about? It was about these Nephilim people wanting to have control over others, you and I. And the amazing thing is people just followed right along like sheep without even questioning it. And it really was a control thing. It really had very little to do with your health. Okay? It may have a small part of it, but that's not what it was all about. And there's a lot of this type of thing still going on. It always has. So, there were giants in the earth in those days. Also, after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, then they bare children to them. They became mighty men, which were of renown, men of old, men of renown. So these bullies, these people who are carnal, they're not behaving in any way spiritual. They're having a big influence on the earth. They even had an influence over the sons of God. God has always commanded that there be a separation of his people. We see that even today. Of God's people and the world, even in a religious sense. And I want to go down a little bit further here. It says, God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually, and it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and creeping thing, fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I made them, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Unless I'm missing something or reading over something, I don't see the consideration of angels here. In fact, I don't see angels mentioned at all. This is all about man. Man being the sons of God, the spiritual ones, being corrupted by the ungodly ones, producing children, and everything just became anti-God, ungodly at this time, to the point to where God wanted to wipe out every living thing. Doesn't mention angels. So I do have time, at least to start and get in this a little bit. So let me make these other points before I go to Job. So the family is the first institution that was ordained by God. Adam is the head of this family, and he is called the Son of God in Luke 3:38. And actually, we'll get to the nation of Israel after we talk about Job. So I'm going to make a connection with Job. When did Job live? Let's go to Job chapter 1. I know Brother Renee, it's been a couple of years now, actually, since you went through Job. So our memory is probably not all that fresh on it, unless you read it a lot, like I do. I love these two chapters and the last chapters. Yeah.
Going back to where it says that the sons of God, took wives, and there's nowhere where it says that there were angels, because the angels are never mentioned throughout the Bible as sons of God.
Right.
Right? So I don't know where this teaching came from or where this idea came from, but that tells me right there that they're not angels.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And there's actually, there's only, I think maybe 10 or 15 places where the term sons of God is used. it's used a lot in the New Testament. We'll get to that next week, and maybe the week after also. But I agree. I don't think it's talking about angelic beings. And
Yeah, the angels were never mentioned
They-
as sons of God.
they can't reproduce. I don't think that's the fact that they possessed men, and then they produced these. It doesn't make any sense because man's seed produces man. Yeah,
Angels don't have seed.
they don't have seed. Exactly.
The whole point of son is about passing down a name, passing
Yeah.
down a lineage and authority, a generation. And angels can't do that at all.
Agreed.
There's no instance of them doing that in the
Yeah.
Bible.
Man was created in God's image. And I'll mention this also because I don't think I said it earlier, but the term son doesn't necessarily have to do with the fact of being born again. It really has more of a position idea. Really, specifically, the firstborn son position, which was the highest position, which has to do with this, the builder of the family idea and the descendants. Children of God, I think everybody who puts their faith in Christ is born again, and they're children of God. I think there were believers in the Old Testament who were children of God. They were saved, but not all of them were sons of God. Yeah.
Synonyms for son used in the Bible is afflicted, aged, anointed one, appointed to, and arrow.
Right.
None of
Yeah.
those are angels.
Right.
Close to angel just means messenger, and it's not even talking about a messenger.
Yeah. Agreed. So I guess my job's done here. I don't have to prove anymore. No, agreed. What? I thought I heard something.
Somebody called.
No, it wasn't a cough. It was something. Maybe one of the angels spoke up. Okay, so let's get into this a little bit. When did Job live, and who was he? We really know nothing about him. The whole book of Job is really, it's really written more not from a historical standpoint, although it is very historical. I believe that. It's more written poetically. But it does introduce us to a man who did live where this land of Uz was, is a little bit uncertain. But just by his character here, he was a Semite, meaning that he was a descendant of Shem. So he's part of this godly line, this godly heritage that is being passed down from Shem. I don't know if he lived at the same time of Abraham. Probably, I would say, give or take 100 years or so. It's around that time period because there's a lot of similarities to character, to how they lived. Although Job seems to be more of a settled man in his surroundings, Abraham was more of a nomad. He didn't really have a land to call his own. He would go from place to place. So they were probably cousins. I don't know if they knew each other, but notice this about Job. Okay, and there's some very interesting things here to consider with our topic. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was perfect or complete, blameless, and upright, one that feared God and eschewed evil. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance was also several thousand sheep and 300 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the east. His sons went and feasted in their houses, every one in his day, and sent and called for the 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. I heard somebody one time say that his children were basically saying that they were kind of partiers because they were eating and drinking. I don't get that sense at all. Just because people are eating and drinking doesn't mean that they're getting drunk. That's probably a misconception of our generation with the term drinking. But drink was a big part of their meals because most often it wasn't necessarily water, it was freshly squeezed juice, which was actually a celebrated thing because it was the fruit of their labors, as was the meal itself in most cases. So the brothers invited the daughters or their sisters over to eat with them, and so it was, when the days of their feasting was gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them. Notice how he does these priestly duties. Okay, this is his position as the head of his house. Even though his children are grown, he says he rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did continually. He didn't seem to be concerned about his daughters. No, I'm sure that they were part of consideration, but he's offering sacrifices and prayers, supplications on behalf of his children. Every parent does that. I don't think it matters how old your kids get. You still are burdened for them and you care for them. And this is the whole process. The whole godly line is this way. Now notice this. Since he's during the time of Abraham, which is before the patriarchal period, before the law period, I should say. It's during the patriarchal period. I think this is a reference to the people of God going before God on a regular basis in what it says here. I don't think we have to super spiritualize this to think that this is a gathering of angelic beings around God. What we're doing right now is the sons of God gathering before God. We're gathering ourselves together. We're presenting ourselves before God. In verse 6 it says, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And then it says this, Satan came also among them. We looked at a few weeks ago when Joshua the high priest in Zechariah chapter 3 was seemed like he was in the Holy of Holies, offering up a sacrifice. Actually, he was probably outside offering up a sacrifice for himself first. Satan was right there, standing by his side, as he was before the Lord, offering up a sacrifice to have his sins cleansed. And Satan was there as the accuser. Satan has always been there among God's people. He was cast down to this earth, and he's been a troubler for man from the very beginning. That's what happened in the fall. In fact, I think, as I think back, of course, nobody was there to see it, but when Satan presented himself to Adam and Eve in the garden, it says he came as a serpent. We just imagine a snake. Based on some things that were said at the cursing of that animal, because of man's sin, it was cursed to crawl on its belly. So we imagine that this serpent, snake-type creature had legs at one time. But this is how Satan presented himself. I don't know how to explain this, so I'm just going to try to say it. I think at this time, Adam and Eve both had spiritual sight to where they could see the spirit realm. Okay? And to refer to Satan as a snake, we know what that means. You know, he's a liar, he's a cheat. We call people snakes. I don't know if there's a correlation there or not, but I think Adam was able to see this angelic being in this form of a snake. So I don't know how else to explain it, but just to say this, that man is a spiritual being that has the capability to go before God in a spiritual sense, even though we're limited to the flesh right now. And we do this through the church. So I want to open up for comments in a few minutes, but I want to read a little bit further here. And actually go over to, so Satan comes among them. We know what happens here. The Lord said unto Satan, where have you come from? And Satan answered and said to the Lord, from going to and fro on the earth and walking up and down in it. So, again, a connection of heaven and earth in the evil sense. Satan is walking up on the earth, and we know what James says. Is it James or Peter? That he's like a roaring lion seeking whom they may devour. It's Peter, right? But New Testament actually echoes that as well. Over in chapter 2 now. This is another place where it's mentioned. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. So I think we're fooling ourselves if we think, in today's world, that as we gather together to present ourselves before the Lord, that Satan's not going to try and mess things up. He does. But what I didn't read was that, I'm just going to tell the story. I don't want to get too involved in it. But when the Lord asked Satan, have you considered my servant Job? What was Satan's first point to that? You have a hedge built around him. I can't touch him. Job willingly kept himself within the protection of God. That's why this hedge was around him. But then once God said, okay, I'll take the hedge away, then go after him. And this is a unique situation. I think this is a situation largely for our understanding, for our benefit. But if we keep ourselves within the confines of God's word and do what is expected of us, live a life the best we can, continually asking for forgiveness of sins because we need it, we are in that protection. And Satan can't touch us as long as we are in that protection. That's a great comforting point. And I don't think it's just limited to Job here. I think it speaks about God's people, the sons of God, throughout the ages. So let me close up by saying this, because next week we're going to get into the Old Testament. The next point of this, and then New Testament. So the nation of Israel is the second institution. First it was the family. I do believe the family is still an institution ordained by God. I think it's tragic that the family has become what it is. That is why society is what it is. And that's why churches are what they are, because the family structure has been destroyed. So the nation of Israel, though, is the second institution that was ordained by God. Abraham is the head of this family and Israel, the nation of Israel. So can somebody read Exodus chapter 4, verse 22? So keeping in mind that Adam, being the head of that family, he's called the Son of God in Luke chapter 3, verse 38.
Read it?
You got it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this chapter 4, verse 22 reads, Then you shall say to Pharaoh, Thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn.
Okay, that's all we need. Israel is my son. It doesn't say the Son of God, but who's speaking? The Lord. Jehovah. Calls Israel, the nation, his son. So now it becomes more confined. The nation is now that position of the sons of God. So it's no longer, I think there was a transition period. I think Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, was probably about the same type of person. He was a Semite, and I think there was a transition period where the heads of families no longer could do it without being part of this great nation. And as it evolved, it was focusing on one thing, and that, of course, was producing the Messiah. So my last point on that, which we'll get into eventually, is the church is the third institution and last institution that was ordained by God. Jesus Christ is the head of this family, and he and they, meaning us, are called the sons of God. And we'll look at all the verses that mentions that. So does anybody have any comments or thoughts? Mr. Bauer?
I think this whole sons of God with the angels thing is because of the book of Enoch. When people are reading into, they're putting a lot of emphasis on one book, and then they ignore the rest of.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. Why are they so focused on this when it's not other scripture is not supported?
Right.
It doesn't make sense.
I agree, and I think a lot of it has to do with how you view. If you don't see the Bible as a continuous book from beginning to end, if you piecemeal it, it causes problems, and you see things. I think you see things differently. The troubling thing is, to me, is that this is very popular in the mainstream Christianity, but I'm seeing and hearing more and more missionary Baptist pastors say this kind of thing, and I don't understand it, but
Say that they're sons of God, saying the angels are...
they're angelic beings. Yes, it's a very popular theory, unfortunately. Yeah.
Probably because they get most of their studying off the internet.
TikTok.
Sure.
Or, yeah, that plus I think a lot of the missionary Baptist seminaries, institutions are nothing more than Protestant. I mentioned my cousin enrolled in the one in Texas, doing video school, and he dropped out because it was misleading. It was not what it presented. The books that they were supposed to read were not missionary Baptist books. They didn't teach missionary Baptist doctrine, and so he just dropped out. It was not what it was supposed to be. Anything else? Okay, if not, we'll get into the New Testament for the most part next week. Brother Ralph.
Brother Water, another belief that people have is the teaching that Satan was cast down from heaven way back before even Jesus was born, and he no longer has access to heaven. But if you look at the book of Revelations, at the end, after the last trumpet, that's when Satan has his final say, his final doings, and this battle between God and the people here on earth. Satan was cast down at that moment after he knew his time was short. Then he was cast down to heaven, and that's when he went after the woman, which is Israel,
Right.
and to go after her and her descendants that worship Jesus. So I want to make that clear